Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast from Nextgate on mapping the social media technology stack. My name is Dave Meislich. I'm the VP of Marketing at Nextgate, and on behalf of our panel, our expert in social media and technology, Alan Weber, who's principal at Asymmetric Insights, and our co-founder of Nextgate and CEO, Devin Redmond, we'd like to welcome you to today's webcast. As a marketer myself, I know how challenging it can be with respect to social media marketing to get your hands around all the different tools and apps and technologies that are out there and to fundamentally make them interconnect and work well, efficiently, but also securely so that your risk in social media is minimized and that you can maximize the ROI of your social media marketing program. So today we've got two great speakers who will walk through the technology stack and how to maximize your technology investment in a secure fashion to advance your social media marketing programs. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Alan Weber, again, principal at Asymmetric Insights, for him to present. Alan.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And thank you again, Dave and Devin, for the opportunity to speak with this crowd and to discuss this a little bit. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is unlocking the social web. How do you actually build an architecture to support your social web efforts? So many of us out there, both in the marketing and the IT areas and things, are familiar with the concept of an architecture. I mean, we've made enterprise architectures, we've done web architectures, we do performance architectures. And how do you actually architect your web experience and bring that in with your social media experience and actually build that up in such a way that makes sense, that it's actually accomplishing the goals that you wanted to accomplish, and it's also meeting your customer and user goals. Those are the real key critical insights here, and that you do it all in a way that's safe and efficient and effective. You know, when you think about it, it's really a jungle out there in the social media world. So many things have changed. I mean, Facebook hasn't been around that long. Google Plus hasn't been around that long. Even if we go back to some of the original stuff, back around email and billboards and things like that, it's just a jungle out there. I swear, my kids, I have 3, all under the age of 18, come home with a new social media platform at least once a week that they're interested in. And it's where these young people are at. It's where some of the older people are at. I mean, there's just this proliferation of social media platforms and ways to connect. And when you think about it, a lot has changed in our communication style that's really brought this about. If you go back and look a little bit, when we originally started back, you think of the concept of, the printing press, or how we would look at photographs and we'd take that and take a 2-dimensional picture and turn it into 3-dimension. Or we'd print something and that we are actually able to distribute it. And remember phone calls when we'd actually reach out and actually touch somebody? It's so funny. These days we send text messages because we don't want to interrupt people. But for some of you out there who might remember this, we used to have these things called party lines. At least that's what I grew up with. So that was the original social media. Right after the city commons, the town commons, the party line was the original social media. If you want to know what was going on in the neighborhood, you just got on the phone and listened to everybody else's business, what it was they were talking about on the phone. And so, but it's changed. We now have tablets and phablets and iPads and iPhones, and every once in a while we actually try to go back to the old rotary phone, as this one photo shows, and say, we kind of miss those ways of connecting safely, efficiently, and effective with people. So, there's a lot has changed, and now social media is the new normal. It's the landscape we all have to deal with. And it's changed the way we actually look at things. It's changed how we go to market. It's changed how we interact with our customers. And in fact, it's changed how it is people function on a day-to-day basis. For example, there's this great app out there that allows you to turn on the camera on your iPhone or other smartphone device and actually sit there and type using the camera. You can see straight ahead so you don't bump into a pole or you don't trip over something in the sidewalk. And, it's just the world we live in. You walk into a restaurant, you get on a bus, you get on a train, you get on an airplane, you go to a park, everybody's sitting on their device, interacting on some social media channel or email channel. It's just that we now see the world differently. We now believe that the importance of this connection is critical. And, the fact of the matter is that social media, because of this, can be a really great channel. You see these stories in the news all the time. Mom finds kidnapped child on the Facebook, or Facebook helps find a kidney donor to save a girl. I mean, there's all these wonderful ways that now that we can also connect with people and relate to people and interact with people and engage with people. But on the other side, social media is not without its risks, as we've obviously seen and heard. I mean, I don't think a week goes by that across my news feed I don't see something about a bullied teen who commits suicide because of something on Facebook, or some employee getting in trouble, for example, like this one on Apple, for something they posted on Facebook, or, now there's supposedly a diagnosis for addiction to social media within the medical field and the psychological field. And people stalk. I mean, who hasn't looked up their old girlfriend or their ex-boyfriend or something like that online? There's risks out there, and social media, though it is a great tool, something marketers have to be on, because honestly, this is where your customers are. Your customers are here on a daily, hourly, probably minute-by-minute basis. And it's critical that companies are there. I mean, again, companies have to be there because this is where their customers are. This is where they need to engage. Next slide, please. And it doesn't matter where you're at in the world and stuff. Social media is it. But, the fact of the matter is that sometimes companies do get it wrong. Bank of America, the whole debit card fee a few years ago is a great example of an opportunity. There was an amazing opportunity there for Bank of America to respond and really take social media by storm and say, okay, yeah, we made a mistake. This is what the deal is. Instead, they were overwhelmed by a social media tsunami that basically hit them and said, people were using this as a protest platform, similar to what we saw, in Wall Street and other places. It was a protest platform that says, okay, what it is you're doing isn't right. There's something, that you've goofed up, and Bank of America just really never came out and owned up to that. So sometimes companies just get it wrong. They don't understand the reach, the impact that social media has. Even some of the best companies out there will make mistakes. Some of the best organizations make mistakes. And sometimes, they're actually targets. I don't know if you all remember this one, but when Greenpeace has been brilliant in its targeting and use of social media on major brands, whether it's one of the oil companies or a company like Nestle. So Greenpeace went after Nestle for their procurement of chocolate and how it was, they didn't use the best methods and the best safety and things like that around this. And basically they were able to, put together this great social media campaign that basically called Nestle, a killer for what it was doing to the apes and things like that, and specifically went after Nestle as a target. Now, is every small company out there going to become a target for somebody like Greenpeace, an organization like Greenpeace? No, it's not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is that if you work for a large company, one of the Fortune 500, one of the Fortune 1000, or even some of the other more local companies out there, there is the potential for you to become a target or make that mistake, to make that slight error that can open up a door to a social media sandstorm that's just going to wipe you out and really negatively impact your customer experience, really negatively impact the customer perception about you. There's so much out there. So when you really look at it, even though social media is this amazing tool, it's an amazing opportunity to reach out to our customers, it's easy to get lost out there if you don't really understand what's going on and where things are happening. If you don't understand what tools you need and what's required to make this work. And so the key question that so many companies that I work with ask is how do you get and maintain control? How do you hold on to that control and bring it back so that you can protect your huge investment in your reputation, your huge investment in your social media efforts, your huge investment in who you are and what it is you've done. So what I generally end up talking with most companies about is really how you build the right architecture to handle and manage social media. And that's really what this comes down to, is putting together the right architecture so that as you design your whole process, your whole system, your whole method of engagement, interaction with your customers, you can actually see what's going on and really understand and protect and build and really make something that's useful to both you and your customers. So what does a social media architecture look like? Well, it's really three things. I'm going through each of these first quickly and then build on them a little bit more. The first one is really what is your social engagement platform? And this wouldn't always be the foundation of a social media architecture, but the assumption is that if you're on this call, that you've already got some experience with social media. Your company's already out in social media someplace, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, whether it's on Tumblr or Pinterest, or whether you're putting stuff up on Instagram or Flickr. You're already out there, so you've already done some listening. You already know some of your customers are out. So the foundation really starts with the social engagement platform. The second layer is really around listening, monitoring, and analytics platforms. Not everybody groups these together, but really when you listen, you monitor, you analyze what it is people are saying, how it is they're interacting with you, how your brand's perceived, what the conversations are like. All these kind of go together in such a way that, you can listen, you can monitor, and then you can analyze and really understand what's being said in what directions and things like that. The third part of this is really the social web security platforms. This is once you've built the foundation, you've got the framework together, and you're actually out there doing this, then how do you make sure you're protected? How do you make sure you're taken care of? And that's really what this is about. So let's go ahead and unpack this a little bit. Let's dig into this and what it actually looks like. So really the first thing you need to work with is you need to start with a really solid foundation, and that's really around the social engagement platforms. And it's these social engagement tools that provide the foundation, the understanding, the functionality for you to actually effectively engage with your clients and your customers, with your partners, with the community at large, just people who are interested. So these are absolutely critical. Next slide, please. And they allow you to build, they give you that foundation to build upon, to put things together, to create that unique identity that is you and your company in social media. So what do these actually do? Well, the first thing that these social engagement platforms are really useful for is engaging with your communities and customers. Okay, next slide. It's really around engaging with your communities and customers. It provides an easy way for you to facilitate and manage that engagement level across your company as a whole. It also provides some really solid workflow and business process management. The better platforms do this, provide some really solid workflow and business process management around how it is you do that in engagement. They help you deliver targeted content and ads to very specific groups or very specific customers or very specific, potential customers or partners, whatever it may be. They also have the ability to deliver domain-specific apps, and they also have the ability to deliver, these amazing marketing campaigns that can be single-channel, multi-channel, and can be, in conjunction with other activities out there, such as an email campaign or some other, say, video campaign or something like that. So these are really the foundation for what it is you're going to build upon. Some of these are, platforms like Sprinkler, Hearsay, Buddy Media, Hootsuite, Sprout Social, Wildfire. And the great thing about social media is it's still so new. There's a heavy overlap across the different vendors. So you're going to see this happen quite a bit where, some people might look at, say, I don't know, Hootsuite and say, yes, that's a social engagement platform, but they do so much more. Yeah, they do. I mean, this is still a fairly young market. We're still kind of breaking this out a little bit, but, you get an idea of who the key vendors are out there. So that's really the first piece, and that's really building the basics for what it is you want to accomplish and how it is you're going to do it. From there, once you have that solid foundation in place, you really want to build a framework. And that framework a lot of times is the content, but it's not just the content. And don't get me wrong, content is absolutely critical. Great content is what makes social media work. It's what makes it worth what it is. But if you don't have a framework in place around monitoring, listening, and analytics to really monitor and understand how that content is perceived, how well it's resonating with your audience, whether or not there's a solid reception to it, what it is they like and don't like, then you really haven't built that framework for that long-term engagement, for that really, that really deep relationship with the customers that it is you're looking for. And so, you really want to start, once you've got that engagement platform and you've built that, you really want to go back and take a look at your listening, your monitoring, and your analytics. So that's really the second step, is listening. hearing what the response is, hearing what the how well it is that the customers and potential customers in your community are picking up on what it is you're saying, how well it is they're responding to the content and different information that you're putting out there, how well they're responding to how it is you relate to them, and whether you're relating to them in a way that makes sense. So what exactly do listening and monitoring and analytics platforms do? I mean, it's the basics. They really mine the external conversations. They really go out there and say, okay, what are the key points we need to pull out of these? They find brand and competitor mentions. Monitoring and analytics and listening platforms are great for competitive intelligence to really understand what's going on within your industry, what's going on with your competitors, what's going on with you, how people are talking to you, what kind of word-of-mouth marketing is happening out there for you. Some of the better platforms get in there. They'll analyze the volume, the sentiment, and other measures and really put together some decent performance metrics. And we're not going to really talk about a performance architecture today, but it's really, going out there and analyzing that volume, sentiment, really understanding how well it is your social media efforts are performing. Are you meeting the expectations? Where can you make adjustments? What kind of content is going to help you make that adjustment? Is it, do we need to go deeper on the content? Do we need to have more long-form content? Do we need to go shorter? Do we need more white papers? Do we need better answers? Do we need actual people to connect and relate back to these people as we have this engagement? And then, the other thing it's really going to do is it's going to identify those trends and influencers. And trends are critical. I mean, I have friends who work up on Wall Street, and one of their favorite sayings is, "The trend is your friend." So you always try to go with your trends. If there's good content out there that's resonating, that people are listening to, that's really connecting with your customers, and you see trends with that, then it's a great opportunity to bring that together and actually, identify those trends, to add more content into it, to become a part of that conversation. It's also a great way and a great platform to really connect with who the influencers are. Who is it that has a deep reach within your tribe? Who is it that actually impacts more people than others? How do you actually find those people and actually get more value from them and the platforms that they hold? And that's really the critical stuff around listening, monitoring, and analytics. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's so much more that these platforms do. Platforms like Brandwatch, Radian6, Crimson Hexagon, Simply Measured, Spreadfast, and among other ones. There's so many things that these do. But I mean, really the basis is that they're going out there and they're pulling out these key tidbits of information that really allow you to figure out how well it is you're doing, what's working and what isn't. And that's got to be the basis of it. So once you kind of have that social engagement platform in place, and you've built that framework around analytics and monitoring, the last part is really putting together the social web security. And the reason why that is so critical is that you don't want all the hard work that you've done to go out the window so quickly. If you've spent a lot of time producing great content, investing in engagement across multiple platforms, really paying attention to what your performance metrics are telling you across the different analytics platforms, listening to your customers and potential customers and modifying your content and what it is you're doing to really make sure you're hitting the keynotes that they want to hear. It's so easy in a social media world for this to go out the window with just one bad tweet, one hack, something like that. And it's so easy to knock all this off the plane. So even though it's kind of the roof in my image, it's really critical. The other critical piece is that when you actually do put this in place, it shouldn't be like some of the web security that's out there that, the silly numbers that we have to put in to be able to log into a site to make sure it's a real person. Well done social web security should be seen, should not be seen, but it should still be there. It's kind of like, I live in Washington, D.C., and ever since 9/11, we've had so many of these different security aspects put in place. The pylons have come on, and originally it was the huge concrete barriers. to protect the different federal buildings and things. These days, though, you see a lot of these, as in this picture, a lot of these metal, just metal stands in place that are designed to keep vehicles out. But they're so unobtrusive that you actually lose them in the picture. When you look at the Capitol, you see the sun shining over the Capitol coming up and things like that. You actually lose it there. And that's the way good web security should be, social web security should be. It should be there, but it really shouldn't impact the relationship between the customer and you. It shouldn't get in the way of that relationship. It shouldn't be a barrier to that relationship. It shouldn't be a barrier to them getting good content, to really building out what it is you need them to see, and for them to see what it is you want them to see. So when it comes down to it, good social web security platforms, the first thing that they really do well is they audit and track social accounts. And if any of you have worked in a large organization, next slide please. If any of you have worked in a large organization, you know well how quickly social media accounts can proliferate across the organization, whether it's across divisions, whether it's across different departments, whether whatever it may be. It is so easy to set up these new accounts and just start posting content on them, that they proliferate across organizations. I've seen organizations that have had over 100 accounts, many of them unknown by the organization, that were supposedly either official or semi-official aspects of the organization. The second thing is that you really need content filtering, and that's one of the things social web security platforms provide, is content filtering. And how do you actually avoid putting out the wrong type of content accidentally? I mean, we've all seen the stuff from the Red Cross where somebody accidentally tweeted something out about getting drunk and stuff on the official Red Cross channel, and thankfully they had a great social media team in there. They were able to respond to it quickly. But content filtering, good solid content filtering, might have stopped that. We saw what happened with KitchenAid and the comment about President Obama's grandmother. And again, good content filtering might have stopped that. I tell people, if you don't have good content filtering, make absolutely sure you don't have your official social media account and your personal social media account on the same mobile device, because that tends to be what happens. The third thing that good social web security platforms really provide are, they find the account hacks and the misuse. And, this does happen, unfortunately. It happened to Nestle from Greenpeace. They were able to get access to their account and take over their account. And we see new accounts, quasi-official accounts happening, on Facebook and Twitter and stuff that really aren't within the purview or the control of the company, but people have been able to create them and put them out there. And most people don't know that these are not the real things. Good social web security platforms also have the ability to enforce appropriate use, the right types of apps and how publishing is done. And again, it's not because people aren't trustworthy, because they definitely are, but it's because people need to have those guidelines, those guide rails, to make sure that they don't go too far out, that they don't actually make mistakes and get out into places where they shouldn't be, or publish things they shouldn't be. And the last bullet here is really a critical one these days. As we see more government involvement in the space of social media, as we see more regulatory, like in the financial services industry, like in pharma and healthcare, even some of the stuff we're starting to see in retail around consumer protection and things. There is so much going on out there around regulatory compliance and archiving now, that one of the things that a good social web security platform does is actually provides that, I would say, for lack of a better term, a peace of mind that you're keeping everything within the compliance that's been set up in the policies that have been entered in the system. And at the same time, you're archiving everything to make sure that you've got the right information, that you've done what it is you need to do, and you can go back and actually demonstrate that should you legally need to. So there's not a lot of really good social web security platforms out there. I mean, there are social web security platforms out there like Nextgate. I've seen some stuff out of, Blue Coat and some other places. There's not a lot out there yet, but this is definitely a growing area, and it's definitely a growing area of need, CMOs and IT offices everywhere need to be focused on. So once you put this foundation in place of a solid web engagement platform, a social web engagement platform that provides that ability to really connect with your customers, to really push that content out there, the right content that it is they're looking for in the right way. Once you've got that framework in place, where you've got the listening, so you're actually hearing what it is people are saying about your brand, and you can respond to it, where you've got that monitoring, so you know not only what's happening with you in your industry, but what's also happening with your competitors, what's happening with tangential industries that might affect you. And then you've actually put on a top of social web security so that you don't go out and let the mistakes that kill all this effort and all this work really damage you and impact you. And you really have the opportunity to let your social media stand out. Your social media efforts can shine. And you're not going to end up as one of the poster children of some analyst somewhere who says, okay, this is how company A goofed up on their social media efforts, or company B goofed up on their social media efforts. Actually, if you end up as, an example for an analyst, and you can learn from that, great. But even worse is that your social media efforts, if you don't put this stuff in place, if you don't build this architecture, then your social media efforts really won't connect with your customers. They won't resonate. The content won't be right, and you won't be protected the way you need to. So I'm going to pause there, and Devin, I'm going to turn it over to Hugh from here, if that's okay.
That sounds great. So thanks, Alan, and thanks for the intro earlier, Dave. And thank you again to everybody in the audience there. Just a quick reminder that you can submit questions via the question box, and we'll get to those at the discussion at the end. But with that, I'll go ahead and kick off my section and just try and pull into light some of the things that Alan said and give you some more examples. So really want to dig into the security side of your technology architecture and why that's so critical. And if you go to the next slide, I think it's important to just quickly kind of recap what Alan said, so you can visualize that as a true technology stack, where you're looking at things like listening to mine external data, to look at conversations, to understand share by voice, to deal with publishing platforms, or SMMS systems as they're often called, to really help you engage and build those communities. And then importantly underneath that, having a dedicated layer for security. And if you really think about that, that is something where there's a true analog or a true precedent in the past. So if you go to the next slide, just to visualize for yourself kind of mentally, if you think of traditional communication channels, and I say traditional, makes it sound like it's very old, but if you think about the evolution of the web or even email, but we'll focus on web for this use case, that idea of a technology stack is very, very present, right? So you have the equivalent of analytics, right? WebTrends, Omniture, Google Analytics. You have the equivalent of CMS systems or engagement platforms, whether that's more recent ones and more modern ones like WordPress, or original ones like Interwoven. And you have the concept of web security, whether you're looking at inbound web protection, things that prevent your sites from getting hacked, like web application firewalls, companies like Imperva, or whether you're thinking about outbound controls to make sure that bad content doesn't go out, or people don't go to sites where they could potentially get infected, and think of solutions like McAfee. Or if you think about more compliance-oriented, looking at webmail and web traffic going out of an organization to make sure that sensitive data isn't leaked, or regulatory requirements are met in that process, you can look at solutions like semantics. So really thinking about that as an equivalent stack, and then understanding that although social has moved very quickly, that kind of history is a good teacher in that environment, and that you will end up having a stack like that, and that the reality is you probably, as much as everybody would wish it, will not just have one solution that does everything. You need specialization, and that's important because if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of those use cases in particular, right? So Alan mentioned these a minute ago, but one of the things that's different about social media, unlike those traditional communication channels, is it's consumerized, right? So there's no friction for creating accounts. So anybody with a good idea, with authorization or without authorization, can create representation for you on the social web, right? Anybody could create a social account with your brand, your name, your logo, your content, and put it on Facebook or put it on Twitter or create a YouTube channel and upload videos. And some of that is great. That organic nature of that is fantastic. Sometimes it's well-intentioned but inappropriate and can get you into trouble. And sometimes it's actually an easy way to spoof your brand, create fake accounts, and actually commit fraud in that environment. So just dealing with that alone is a huge challenge that's introduced by that frictionless nature of the social web. If you expand on that and you think about other security use cases, oftentimes it's easier to think about these things directionally, right? But things that are outside of my brand and my accounts that are trying to do me harm, and dealing with that as an inbound protection, right? So looking at the accounts and trying to make sure that nothing is trying to hack it or create an anomaly or take advantage of your brand. And you can see those examples. Alan mentioned some out there, but there have been a lot of high profile, highly visible account hacks, and nobody wants that to happen to their program. Because aside from that moment of embarrassment, there is that 3 or 4 weeks of cleanup where you're changing passwords on accounts, you're explaining that your program is safe, you're justifying your social efforts, and you're trying to recreate your entire architecture. And that is not only costly and time consuming, but it's also not great for the validity of your program. The other aspect of inbound protection is if you're successful on social media, you're creating engagement. And the more engagement you create, the more likely you are to have people come in and actually try and hijack that for their own purpose, right? The easiest thing to look at on this front is really spam. So thinking about that inbound protection is another important area. And then if we go to the third kind of big bucket of controls that you need in the area that really needs a lot of attention, is really thinking about it from what is my data and how I'm interacting with my audiences, and how do I make sure that that doesn't run me afoul of a regulator or of my own governance standards. And this can come from having too many people with access to the account, too many apps installed and allowed to publish, and I'll talk about each of these in a moment. But really kind of making sure that you understand how you're engaging and making sure that you're actually managing that for efficiency and safety. But then also looking at that content and thinking about regulations and things that are standards for your organizations over other communication channels like email, like webmail, like any of the things that you would do, and applying those same standards and that same scrutiny and the same level of technology control over the outbound communications. Whether you're in financial services or life sciences, which are heavily regulated, or whether you're worried about things like the SEC and you're a public company. These are all examples of compliance controls. So I just wanted to give that perspective of how many kind of key areas there are, kind of outline 3 here, and then we're going to dig into some of those use cases specifically to talk about how complex they could be. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just start right at that very top area. How do you get visibility into your infrastructure, right? Answering that first question, what accounts do you have? Most brand managers know the top accounts that they're managing. They probably are aware that there's other out there, but how do you systematically identify authorized accounts or identify unauthorized accounts but are well-intentioned? And here's a couple good examples here, right? You can see there's a verified account. It's been clearly verified by the platform. So this is a legit Facebook page. But if we look at this other example of a Facebook page, it is well-intentioned and it's got a nice fan base, but it's not necessarily an authorized account. It's not being actively managed in a central or even a decentralized fashion. So how do you find those accounts? And then even beyond that, how do you assess what's happening on them, right? Do they have safe content? Is there lots of spam on the account? Is it risky from a content perspective? From an application perspective, what's publishing on that account, right? Does it have lots of mobile apps, right? Is Twitter for iPhone, Twitter for Windows Mobile, Facebook for iPhone authorized on that account and actively publishing content on behalf of the brand? And identifying that app environment gives you another hint into what kind of risk do I potentially have in that environment. So being able to figure that out and assess content and apps and give yourself a risk assessment on that front, and then kind of taking the next step and being able to act on that, which we'll talk about in a second, is a critical piece. But also importantly, because it's so easy to commit fraud on the social web, right? It's so easy to create a fake account. While you're systematically looking for your accounts, whether they're authorized or unauthorized, you also want to find fraudulent accounts. whether you're in a retail environment and you're selling technology and you want to make sure people aren't selling pirated or knocked off software or knocked off products, or whether it's subscriptions, or whether people are just trying to take advantage of your brand recognition to hijack your brand and push their own cause or actually attack you, you need to also be able to find those accounts. So just in summary, and if you kind of click on the next there, the requirement for this is really trying to do this manually doesn't scale, doesn't work, it's not persistent, so you're not staying on top of the issue. So really the requirement from a security front is to automate account discovery and the analysis of those accounts and have that on an ongoing basis. And that's a very kind of tall order to place out there, and that is something that you need from a security perspective, uh, irrespective of all the other solutions you may use for analytics or engagement. You need to be looking at your infrastructure and specifically analyzing your infrastructure for risk. If you move on to the next use case, really is about scaling that safety. And as I mentioned before, the success and the metrics that you achieve in a social program are usually measured in eyeballs and people kind of engaging with you. And the more eyeballs you get, the more likely you are to attract things like bad content. And when you have bad content, that's a killer for good conversation, right? So you created engaging dialogue, you've done a great post, you've put some good content up, and about 3 comments in, somebody starts spamming your audience. And not only does that have a chilling effect on that conversation, but ultimately you're paying for somebody else to exploit your audience, distract your audience. And really dealing with that environment at scale doesn't work with people. You don't do this over email, right? You wouldn't take your anti-spam gateway out and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to have either my customer service team or 16 strangers that I don't know come in and read all of my inbound emails and delete the bad ones and engage on the good ones. The reality is you need to actually, and this is kind of the requirement here, to automate the removal of bad content. Right? This isn't people who are complaining about your brand. This isn't negativity. This is people that are trying to exploit your audience or abuse the microphone that you kind of provided out there. You just need to remove that signal noise out of the mix. Right? That is something that your teams and your precious resources shouldn't be focused on. That should be removed from their view automatically so that they can engage with somebody that may have a legit complaint. And just to recap, in case you think that that spam that goes onto a page is something that's benign or relatively safe, or it's no big deal, the reality is that spam actually typically leads to something else that's much more insidious, right? So you can see here the common one is a work from home scheme, make some more cash. And then as you connect with that person, here's an example, they start sending you links, right? Hey, we're a multi-level marketing scheme, this is how we work here, connect with me here. And then once you start connecting and you click on these links, they're asking to install things. And those things are typically designed to kind of steal your information, steal your credentials to things like your social accounts, etc. So by allowing this on your page with your audience, not only are you paying for them to be able to exploit your audience, you're also letting your audience get potentially infected. And even if that's only 1 out of 1,000, what's the cost of actually letting your audience be exploited by some third party? And not only letting them be exploited, but actually sponsoring that. So that is something that is coming more and more into focus, because social media is becoming more and more of an engagement method with audiences, with customers. So as those eyeballs move there, the bad guys move there too. And the less diligent you are about removing that, the more opportunity you have to actually hurt your efforts on social media and actually hurt your audience in the mix. So that is a whole area, again, that requires dedicated coverage and real technology to deal with that. If we move on to the next slide, this is something that Alan touched on earlier, and I think it's very important to understand. A lot of people kind of have this idea that, hey, if I invest in a great SMMS platform, which you all should, you should have a social media marketing system, a publishing system of record, that I'm going to be safe and nobody else is going to have access to the account, and there's going to be no other content that comes from any other source on the account. And the reality is that's just not the way social media works, especially in a large organization with lots of accounts and lots of stakeholders in social. It's not to say that having a couple different mechanisms to publish content is a bad thing, but not knowing what those routes are and actively managing them is what leads to that inefficiency and risk. And so you need to have visibility. Alan mentioned a great scenario with KitchenAid. I think a lot of you kind of know that story, but the reality of what happened was they have over 15 apps that actively published on the one Twitter account. And there are reasons for some of those apps, but a lot of them, like the multiple mobile applications on there, are something that just needed more visibility and then active management. So the blunder happened when somebody had authorized Twitter for Windows Mobile onto both their personal account and their work account, and then accidentally tweeted thinking it was going to the personal account out onto the corporate account, something that was very inappropriate about the president during the debates and cost KitchenAid a lot of time and money to deal with and recover, and something that you wouldn't want to happen. But really understanding that and dealing with that is part of knowing what apps are associated with your account and then being able to deal with them. Next, in terms of addressing control, if you kind of click on that next animation there, is along those lines, you're always going to have multiple people that still have direct access to the account, whether they have access because they need to do things like media buys, or they need to pin posts at the top of a Facebook page, or they use a different app that is designed to place ads in real time or place content at the best time during the day. There's a likelihood that you're always going to have a handful of people that have that direct access. So first, knowing who has access is important, along with managing those apps, but then also being able to look at the profile of the account, lock it, and then detect when something has changed so that you have a running log of those changes, both for internal governance, but also to detect if there's an anomaly happening on the account, right? Somebody comes in and they change the profile picture, or suddenly the account has new admins and new apps that have been added. You need to be alerted of that and capture that in a running log, but also be able to react if that is something that is clearly inappropriate and lock down the account, because that is one of those symptoms of being hacked, is things change in the attributes of the account, or content gets posted inappropriately suddenly that says something like the SEA was here, right? So being able to detect any of those changes in the core of the account is critical to protecting it and to addressing your control. And that's really the requirement here, is you need technology. And if you click on next, you need dedicated technology that looks at things that are accessing or changing the account and who has access to the account, as well as actively controlling what applications you have, right? You need to know what they are, and then you need to consciously decide, hey, I may have one person that is a mobile reporter is going to an event and they need to have Twitter for iPhone and allowed on their device, but I do not need to have BlackBerry and Windows Mobile and mobile web all authorized to publish on the account. I need to be much more diligent about controlling that. So really that's key to addressing control. Now, if you go to the next slide, just talking from an outbound perspective, a lot of these things apply here as well. But in thinking about regulations and compliance, I think a lot of people are quick to kind of marginalize that or put that in the corner of that's something that financial services worries about, or something that life sciences and healthcare worries about. The reality is regulators are coming from all directions at this. This is only going to increase over time. The common stance that you can see, whether you're talking about the highly regulated and FINRA and FFIEC or the FDA, or whether you're talking about more broad standards like the SEC's regulation FD, or the FTC or the SEC, the FCC, that are all looking at this, is they're going to apply the same rigor to social media that they apply to the other communication channels the brand has. And what that means is you need to apply that same rigor in protecting that, whether you're matching to a particular standard or whether you're actually looking at more broad-based things around talking about performance or talking about confidential data for the organization on social media. And the reality is this requires real technology, just like you use data loss prevention on your email outbound, on your web outbound. You need to leverage the same type of technology or the same capabilities that are more than keywords and workflow, right? You shouldn't be burdening your social program with becoming compliance experts. And frankly, the more you do that, the more you're going to run into issues where the human eye and a repetitive workflow is more likely to miss something if it's just looking for a keyword that filters on it versus looking at real contextual data, right? An FFIEC violation can be triggered by not only the keyword, but also knowing that there's not a disclaimer link on that, and being able to automatically detect all of those variables beyond just looking at the keyword and saying, hey, this is a financial services account. This is something that's making an offer and implies good rates, and it doesn't have a link that goes to a disclaimer of those rates. That is a textbook FFIEC violation, but that is something that if you were just looking at the keyword free and it went to somebody who's not well versed in all of the aspects of that standard to review it, and they went ahead and say, yep, that's okay, and they approve it, guess what? You suddenly committed that regulatory violation. And so that is something that you shouldn't burden the social team with. You actually need real technology on that front. And further to that point, and kind of tying into something we were talking about from an efficiency perspective earlier, if you're relying on the workflow through one publishing app to manage your regulatory compliance, to provide that workflow around content, what happens when somebody goes through one of the other apps and it completely skips that workflow? How would you have visibility into that? How would you control and make sure it goes to the right app? And if it doesn't, how would you automatically take action on that content and be able to prove to an internal audit team or an external audit team that you actually have a policy and you enforce that policy? So that is something that you need technology to do on that front. And in terms of kind of summing that up in a requirement, if you really think about that, you do need sophisticated, dedicated content analysis and filtering technology for outbound things that match to regulations, that match to compliance standards. And you, again, need application controls to make sure you understand the route and can take the appropriate action when that appropriate route isn't followed. So these are all things that kind of come into that mix. If we go to the next slide, I think there's a couple of other areas to talk about, which is security has a place in your organization, right? You probably already have security in there. And so thinking about solutions that may seem new to you as a social marketer, but are not new to your organization, is an important thing to kind of have as a consideration here. So one of the first ones I'll talk about is archiving. Archiving absolutely required for your social media communications. It doesn't equal compliance. It is part of a compliance architecture, right? So just like for email, you have solutions that deal with inbound spam. You have solutions that deal with real-time controls for outbound content that look at data and look at compliance. And you have archiving to capture that activity and maintain that record for search. You need the same thing for social. You should leverage the archiving system that makes the most sense for your organization, whether it's one that you already have that you want to tie in and add social content into it, and you want to do that with a system that knows how to integrate with that, just like you would use an email system that knows how to integrate with your archiving system, or whether you need something new and you need to change. There is a broad field of archiving solutions. So I would encourage you to definitely assume that that needs to be part of your architecture, but don't assume that because it's archiving, that solves everything. You still need the real-time controls and the rest of it that ties into archiving. There's lots of data on it. This is an area where we do lots of partnering, so you can see solutions out there in action from Global Relay and any of the other vendors in that mix. Again, think about archiving as part of this, but not as the solution for everything you need to do for social media security. And then if you move to the next slide, another area that people often don't think about, but security teams are very focused on, is they leverage security information and event management systems. And they leverage those to keep a bead on all the different security technologies they have in place and to identify where they have a potential risk right now. So whether it's coming from email or somebody's desktop that's infected or a web server that's being compromised or an event on a social account, that should be something that you're thinking about and knowing that your security team is going to ask you to integrate with. And so this is another area where we've done a lot of work with our customers to make sure that we have integration with all the leading platforms out there so that as you leverage social media security, it is integratable and is something that works with the rest of the architecture that your security teams are going to be familiar with, so that this is something that can snap into place and be additive to what they're already doing and add that efficiency. So with that, I just want to close with a couple points in there. And again, thanks to Alan for kind of walking through how to think about a social technology stack and how to think about the problem overall. And I think it's important to understand that your social media program has a technology stack. You need to think about it that way. You also need to think about security in particular as something that needs to be focused on. It's something that if you don't have it, it can hurt your audience. It can hurt the ROI of your program because you're trying to do a lot of things manually and unnaturally, and it can hurt your overall program. And security should do all of those things. It should protect your brand, it should protect your accounts, it should protect the audience and free up your resources to engage with that audience. It should also do things like protect your investment in engagement platforms and the ROI you get from them. And then it should also kind of keep you free from those regulatory fines and help leverage the other investments you have in security. And so those are all things that you should be looking at in a security architecture. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up and kind of open it up for questions. Again, thank you everyone for joining us and listening to us talk on this topic.
Great. Thank you, Devin. And thank you, Alan, very much for the presentation. Very informative. And want to welcome everybody in the audience here to go ahead and submit your questions through the GoToMeeting question portal there. Should be on the right side of your screen. So go ahead and pop some of those questions in. And while you do, we'll go ahead and get started answering a few of those. So Devin and Alan, you are both live on the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar now. And we've got our first question, which is around, of course, the staple question of any webinar: can we get the slides following the presentation? And absolutely, we'll be sending out a link to the slides that you can download afterwards. We have another question here, which I'll open up to the panelists. It's can social listening tools help find social accounts? So I think that the question is around whether or not somebody who has a listening tool can use that to help find fake and fraudulent accounts that may exist out there, or what the best way to go about that is. Alan?
Sure. So, Alan, do you want to take a quick stab at it first? And
sure. The answer is yes, but it's kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You know, you might get lucky and you might find one or two if somebody's being, you know, really putting a lot of stuff out there, but it doesn't. Listening and monitoring is looking more at what's happening in the conversation and not the existence of the account itself. So I would say yes, it's a possibility, but not as rigorous as I would like to see. Devin?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think, you know, a lot of times people think about conversation as the thing that's going to be what enlightens them to the account. And the reality is you need to identify the conversations, but it's a different use case. Sometimes the accounts that those conversations are happening on are useful ones to track. But that technology by itself is really not designed to find accounts, right? You don't go out there and put in keywords into a listening platform and assume that it's going to find, you know, type in Netflix and it's going to find every Netflix account. It is going to find people saying pound Netflix or at Netflix and conversations about Netflix. But really, it's more about looking at that as how would I tackle an inventory search? And that's not something that's the forte of listening platforms.
Great. Another question here is, what's the difference between content filtering and content moderation technologies? Devin, you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a look at that. So, or I'll take a stab at that. So content moderation, and really when you think about moderation, it's about the entirety of engaging in that conversation. So a lot of times when you look at a content moderation service or you look at content moderation features, they're talking about everything from engaging in a customer service request or an inquiry to the brand, all the way to trying to tackle what happens when somebody starts using profanity. Content filtering technologies from the security perspective are really designed to look at specific types of content in a conversation and then take actions on that conversation. So, you know, for example, a spam content filtering solution is designed to identify accurately spam and then remove it automatically. So you're not relying on people to do that. So from a recommendation perspective, yes, you want to leverage content moderation for those customer service scenarios, but no, you probably don't want to leverage a manual service or a keyword-only based service to remove spam or things that are obviously abuse and hate. You should have a solution that's designed to understand what those are and then automatically remove them.
Great. Alan, anything to add on that, or?
No, I think the only thing that I would add is just the nuance of the language. I think as you know, these tools become smarter and smarter, and as people who use them become more integrated with them, it's critical to actually have that ability to understand the nuances of the language and what really means what. So I think we're moving in that direction.
Super, super. This next one is kind of near and dear to my heart as a head of marketing because I buy so much marketing technology. Is, how do we tell if our employees are using our publishing tool? Right? We've spent some money on technology. How do we know that people are actually using it and following the workflow and process that we've established with a publishing tool?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that one. So obviously there's the internal mechanisms to see how much content has been generated through that system. Then the other side of that, and this is again an area for technology, is looking at your account and having a solution that can actually tell you what apps are being used and how much of your publishing app is being used versus the other ones. This is actually something that we at Nextgate have a patent pending technology to do that allows you to see what apps there are on an account, how much publishing is happening through each of those, and then actually being able to set a policy to say, hey, if I've purchased Hootsuite and I want to make sure people are publishing through Hootsuite, I'm going to set a policy that enforces that. And so that from a technology perspective is one way to approach that problem. I don't know, Alan, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think it's everything you outlined, Devin. I think it's really just an analysis and looking and saying with a good tool that says, okay, what's out there versus what the system is showing that's out there, and that's, it's not that hard to find. It's not that hard to figure out. And most of the good tool sets out there will quickly tell you whether or not people are using the tools that you've laid out for them and following the policies you laid out.
All right. So we've got just 1 minute left, so I'll ask this one last question here for both of you. There's a question that is, who owns / deploys social media security technology? That's an interesting question, right? So Alan, you want to take that first?
Yeah, generally, it's got to be in combination between the CMO and the CIO. Generally, when it comes down to it, it's who actually is buying the technology. But really, if something goes wrong, if there's a breach or a hack or something like that, the person who really gets caught on the carpet and ends up being responsible for that is more the CIO than the CMO. I think the CMO has to have, a large part in this, but in the end, the person who's generally held responsible is the CIO. So hopefully that'll change in the future as we get better differentiation among the C-suite and responsibilities when it comes to social media. As one gentleman from the GE board said, social media and social media risk is a board level issue. And so I think we're starting to see that switch, but that's generally what it is. I'm still seeing it in most places. Devin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say social media is a new communication channel, and it started in the line of business, right? So the marketing teams were the original owners of that. It's actually not that dissimilar to the web, right? Back in the early days of the web, there was a role called the webmaster that was very closely tied to marketing, and that changed and evolved as a role over time to include many different aspects, both in IT and in marketing. And as Alan mentioned, we're starting to see more of that where there is somebody in the marketing group that is responsible for that technology stack and working through that technology stack. And they're typically more IT oriented. They may be marketing IT operations, they may be social governance, but their role is really figuring out that environment. And they're becoming more and more aligned with the traditional IT group and with the CIO. But I think, as Alan pointed out, this is something that is very visible, is something that's very oriented towards the line of business. And so you're seeing it move up to that C-level suite where the conversations, the way that you manage social is something that is discussed with the CMO, with the CIO, and with the rest of that group, including the board sometimes, especially when there's an issue. So, my advice would be to start with that line of business if you're the original owner, and then figure out who those other stakeholders are quickly, because if something goes wrong, you're all going to be called to the mat in that scenario.
Yeah, yeah, no, great answers and great information, guys. I want to thank you very much. And just to dovetail on that, there's a terrific paper that we have available on our website from Alan, actually, that talks about mapping social media roles and responsibilities. Terrific resource to be able to think about how you can organize internally your teams across different departments and their ownership of your social media, both policy and technology and process. So with that, I want to end today's webcast. I want to thank our presenters, Alan Weber, Principal at Asymmetric Insights, Devin Redmond, Co-founder and CEO of Nextgate, and invite you to visit us at nextgate.com for more information on how Nextgate can help protect your brand and ensure compliance for your social media. Thank you and have a great day.